Thanks, guys, for joining the webinar with Guy and myself. And as we all know, the COVID-19 is playing a very important role, both in positive manner and negative manner in day-to-day life. And it has been an honor to have Guy Kirkwood here to share his views on the impact of COVID-19 and how automation can be a game changer to recover from this particular pandemic. I know Guy for the last 4 or 5 years now, and he's always been forthcoming in innovative thought process. I will give the mic to Guy to introduce himself and take it forward.
Thanks, Mohit. Good afternoon. Good, well, I mean, for most of you, it's good afternoon. It's good morning to me. In fact, it's rather nice morning. My name is Guy Kirkwood. I am the Chief Evangelist for UiPath, one of the main, one of the big three, basically, although we're quite small, RPA vendors. And I've been involved in the automation market, as Mohit said, since about 2013, 2014, and joined UiPath originally as Chief Operating Officer, and then switched to this Chief Evangelist role in about 6-8 months after joining. Reason for that was that twofold. One is that I found this bi-directional role in the mode of Guy Kawasaki, who was Chief Evangelist of Apple, fascinating because it's bi-directional. I'm spreading the word out, but also collecting information and feeding that back into our organization so that we can adapt and change and stay agile and so on. Second reason is that being Chief Operating Officer, I realized very quickly, in fact, Daniel, my boss, co-founder and chief exec, realized very quickly I couldn't operate anything. So there was two reasons for that. So the great thing about the Chief Evangelist role is this thing that I do, talk, and Mohit and I have been working very closely together pretty much since Mindfield was started. And the great thing about Mindfields and other of the smaller implementation partners implementing RPA and AI into organizations around the world is that they are a lot more agile. So a lot of the forward-thinking things that are taking place in the market are being done by organizations like Mindfields in Australia, in Southeast Asia, by organizations like Symphony Ventures, who were acquired recently by Sykes in the US, Lark AI in South Africa, Carve Consulting in the Nordics, and so on. So I'm delighted, Mohit, to be part of your look forward. I mean, you've got a green screen behind me. I can't get that to work for some reason on GoToMeeting, so please ignore the sickly green color behind me. But let's crack on and see where we go on looking at the market and some potential futures. But thanks, Mohit.
Sure, thanks, Guy. Thanks for your introduction. I'm Mohit. I'm founder and chairman of Mindfields. We started 14 years back, and we're the first company in Australia and among the first few globally to start RPA advisory and then into implementation. And we have been supported by UiPath in our journey, and I think they have been very supportive in terms of the new features they are launching and the way they have grown, adding new features every, I think, quarterly is an amazing task. But I think today we want to have much more conversation. So there will be no slideshows, and we would like to really appreciate if you can send your questions through chat, and I will share with you the agenda for this webinar. Is that Guy and myself will cover about what, why, and how of COVID-19 automation, how it will make an impact going forward. Then we have live polls, we'll have some case studies, client calls, and then we have a QA. Q&A is the most important part of this webinar. We want to address the concerns, the queries, the questions of the participant. So please keep on sending your questions, and we'll pick and choose and answer those questions in the last half of the webinar. And we'll have the polls throughout the session to keep the audience engaged. Guy, over to you. I will take out the slides now, and we'll just talk about, as a chief evangelist, you have a very important role to guide the clients, to guide the salespeople, the product people, what's happening in the market, how it's going to impact both the consumer, the clients who are using automation, who are your current client, prospective clients, and why do you think automation can be a game changer in post-COVID?
Thanks, Mohit. I mean, that's literally the several billion-dollar question. If you look at the development of the RPA market, it's really exploded over the last, I suppose, 2 to 3 years. If you look back, RPA was originally invented, for those who don't know, by a British company called Blue Prism, and Blue Prism does a phenomenal job of creating what is now a category out of basically nothing. And so then Automation Anywhere came onto the market, and then the UiPath. It was actually described by Alex Gessels, who worked with WorkFusion, another of the RPA vendors, as being the RPA being the new BAU, the new business as usual, or would ultimately become that. Which was sort of appropriate because the B was Blue Prism, the A was Automation Anywhere, and the U was UiPath. I like that, so I stole it. But looking at the development of the RPA market, it started, funnily enough, it's a bit like the start of the coronavirus. So it started very flat, and then suddenly it took off. So we've had hockey stick growth in the market, which, ironically enough, is why, looking back to January, I could see there were two groups of people that could see the development of COVID-19 as a pandemic. They were A, finance people, and B, techies like me, because we recognized that and understood exponentiality. So logarithmic growth, and so we could see that. I locked us down slightly before everyone else, sort of a week and a half before everyone else. But anyway, by the by, so RPA as a way of improving the functionality of an organization has really gained traction. Now, if you look back over the last, up until about the last 2 years ago, all of the business cases for RPA were predicated on job cuts, on headcount reduction, on cost out. But over that time, organizations that put in automation realized that the value of the automation is actually in increasing employee engagement, increasing the value of their people, because they found that their people were actually much more valuable than they thought they were. So to give you an example, a US federal agency had 790 people doing a particular process, a big organization, and their business case for introducing RPA was to reduce that number by half. Not unusual. They still have 790 people doing that particular process, but those people are now doing 70% more work. So the value of RPA has grown within organizations as they found more and more use cases, more and more business cases to actually implement it. And now it's being spread throughout organizations. So when we look forward to where we are now with COVID, what we found, and I think that from what I hear our competitors are finding as well, is that RPA is acting as an accelerant for digital transformation. So everyone has looked at digital transformation as something they need to do, because they've recognized all those stories that you know really well about how previous generations of organizations have been affected and disrupted by their digital peers. And so digital transformation is something that they felt they needed to do. What COVID-19 has done, and it's a great example from Rory Gray, who's a colleague of mine. He had a conversation with the chief executive of a very large Fortune 100 organization, speaking to the chief executive, who's a friend of his, and he said, I never really understood digital transformation. It's something that I pushed down in the organization, something that I pushed down to my subordinates and then to their subordinates. COVID-19 has now made me recognize that digital transformation, of which RPA is part, of course, is my responsibility. My task is to make sure that we survive and thrive during and after the pandemic. And that is a radical difference. So RPA traditionally has grown, and we can talk a bit about this, bottom up. So it's within organizations. People have democratized it. We and our competitors have democratized it so that people can use automation relatively easy. So it's grown up in organizations. Now with COVID-19, it's also being driven top down. So it's being driven by the boards as a way of surviving the COVID-19 crisis, as more people are working from home and other disruption. And then looking forward, which we'll come to, is a way of dramatically improving the way that they run their business. So Mohit.
So Guy, do you think, I want to do one poll here, and we'll discuss that poll. So participants, please look at the poll on the screen now, and you can start polling, and then we'll close the poll in 1 minute. So Guy, do you think the role has changed of the CIOs, the CEOs? Because the CIOs were pushed back in last decade that the CFOs or CEOs will drive the digital transformation. But after this COVID, or during this COVID, I think the CIOs are getting back the power.
Yeah, when we were discussing the questions, I thought this was a fantastic question. And I don't know the answer to this. In fact, no one does. However, as it relates to digital transformation, as it particularly relates to RPA, then the relationship between the RPA vendors, most of them anyway, and the CIO has been fairly rocky, to be fair. The reason for that, of course, is that the entire raison d'etre for CIOs to build a bright, shiny new system with straight-through processing. If you've got that, you don't need robots. But actually, even if you look at Europe, for instance, there are 1,800 shared service operations in Europe alone. 80% of those do not even have a single ERP. So the CIOs have never produced that bright shiny, and you can see RPA and AI acting as the glue. So there's a guy called Adam Devine who came up with the idea that all the technologies that sits in an organization, so you've got ERP and CRM and the whole alphabet soup. Look at that. So all of that is actually coming together, not in one blob in the middle, but where they overlap very slightly, that's where RPA and AI sit. So the CEOs, as I mentioned, realize and recognize that the digital transformation is their responsibility. The delivery engine for that is the CIO. So RPA is now seen by CIOs as being just as applicable to the development of their organizations as it has been previously in business processing areas. And I think the reason for the business processing areas initially was because most of us that came into the market came from shared service, from captive operations, from global business service units, from outsourcing companies. That was my background. So we thought in business process, we didn't think in IT. So we saw originally RPA as a way of getting around IT, not having to wait for IT so that businesses could do it for themselves. But with now, with the capabilities of RPA being applicable for ITSM, for SIAM, and particularly with the launch of our UiPath testing, IT testing operation, which starts in about 10 days. We're launching it for GA. Then actually the relationship we've got with IT is much better now. So I think it is, as the poll came out, very evenly split between CIOs and CEOs. And the CIOs have to recognize that there is a broad church within the development of technologies that will help them, and then spread those throughout the organization, not in the way that it's been done before, where it's all been controlled and governed and so on, but actually on a much more of a hub and spoke model. So Everest, for instance, Everest Group, one of the leading analyst firms, did a study of the organizations that have been most successful at automation or implementing automation. And they all operate on a hub and spoke COE model. So COE is a center of excellence, sometimes called a robotic operations center, a centralized one of those, controlled by IT, has the governance and controls and so on necessary, but then is evangelized within the broader organization, within the operation companies, within the different business units and so on, that have the subject matter expertise of operating. So the control of the CIO is there to protect the data and protect the operating model, but then the evangelism of the automation and AI can actually take place within the business units. So I think this reflects that poll. So good, interesting.
Thanks, Guy. I think I agree with you. Most of our sponsors were CFOs or CEOs, and CIOs were a bit of showstoppers because they were not looking the previous generation of RPA tools as a very mature product. But now they are the one who are advocating the implementation of RPA. In fact, they're fast-tracking it. Over the last 3 months, we have seen that they're fast-tracking it because now they think that automation is the next wave after outsourcing.
Yeah,
so
that's
Guy,
a completely different conversation. So that's a completely different conversation. A lot of organisations are having is the outsourcing versus or captive operations versus automation. But we'll move on to that, I'm sure.
Yes, so I want to cover that point here because since you also have a background from shared services from your previous lives, and the first mover like ANZ Bank or RBS or Barclays, they all started with shared services automation. And currently, like a lot of our clients, I'm just trying to cover some case study here that one of our clients is the energy client and they have outsourced to India and Philippines. And nobody has foreseen that the operation will be locked down in India and Philippines. So they want to automate more and more faster. So now they want to bring the jobs back. Again, it's a bit of a challenge because it's going to impact the local economy in India and Philippines, but it also gives an opportunity for them to move up the value chain. Any comments from your side post-COVID? What will be the impact of the outsourcing industry in India and Philippines?
Yes, and I'll start by saying I've been predicting the death of the outsourcing market for several years, and I've always been wrong. In fact, it's catastrophically wrong. From my perspective, from my predictions, it's always difficult to predict the future. But outsourcing organizations and captive GBS operations, global business service units, sitting in Southeast Asia, operating within the Australian market. I know this from my previous life that the outsourcing was something that the banks and the miners did, but not many organizations did because Australia it's a long way from where these offshore locations are based. Plus, if you looked at the growth of the BPO and captive market, it tended to be in areas like India and the Philippines, which you mentioned, and then it spread into other countries like Vietnam and so on. The management of that became more and more difficult because they moved from tier 1 cities like sort of Mumbai or Bengaluru to tier 2 cities and then tier 3 cities as they become victims of their own success. And tier 3 city, by the way, I define as having a university but no airport. So you can train people up, but they can't escape. So I know I've sat on buses for 5 hours getting to these places. So the management of that became more and more onerous. Plus, because the salaries kept going up, then the labor arbitrage argument was diminished over time as well. So outsourcers became the first customers of RPA. In fact, the organization I work for was the first customer of UiPath. In fact, it wasn't even UiPath when we first started talking to them. It was still Deskover at that point. So as the first customer, we recognized that automation was the way forward, which is why I got involved in the market. But actually, if you look at the outsourcing market now, it has changed. So if you look at for instance, our training platform, UiPath Academy, about 9% of our revenues come from India, for instance. But 60% of the people that went through the course, have been through our courses up until about, I suppose, a year ago, were based in India. So that was a good demonstration of democratization, of these organizations changing bottom up, not top down. Now I think that all of the outsourcing companies are automating as much as they possibly can to continue to provide good service for their customers. But with COVID-19, of course, and all of their people now working from home, if they can work from home, and a lot of countries you can't actually do that, then it becomes much more difficult. So organizations are looking at mitigating the risk of having their operations either internally within a captive or externally with outsourcers, and then automating more and more and more of what they can. That doesn't diminish the role of the outsourcer, because a lot of our big partners and customers, funnily enough, are outsourcing organizations, but they need to adapt and change. If you speak to NASCOM around the Asia Pac area, then there's a dramatic improvement in the efficiency of outsourcing driven by automation. I think that will continue. So my prediction that outsourcing is going to die has been wrong and will continue to be wrong.
So I just want to launch a poll on this topic also, and we can discuss the outcome with you. So what is the impact of COVID-19 on right sourcing strategy for large organization? Please select the one of the following options and let us know your views. So Guy, I think if you look at the current, say Accenture's, Genpact, Cognizant of the world, they have hardly automated 4% or 5% of their processes which have been outsourced to them. So there's a huge potential left in them to automate the processes and give the client better efficiency. So I think the next wave, you will see that the client will force the vendors to automate more.
Yeah, without question, yes. And you know, if you take India, which I know better than the Asia Pac market, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has given special dispensation, even though the entire country is locked down, to the shared service and outsourcing organizations to actually keep 50% of their people working because they just cannot work from home. You know, broadband is, I mean, other than mobile communication, which is quite good, broadband at home is quite rare. And in fact, some of their people don't actually have electricity at home. So it's impossible for them to work from home. So they've got 50%, they're allowed 50% of their people back inside the company, even during lockdown. That's all well and good within the organization itself, because they tend to be cubicle workers and you can spread them out through the cubicles so that they are socially distanced within work. But the problem is, look at this, but the problem is that they still have to get to work and they don't have their own transport, so they have to travel by public transport. So there's an increased risk of them catching COVID-19 whilst they're in public transport getting to work. So there's a bit of an ethical issue here as to, you know, whether, who do you decide who's going to come back to work, and that puts them at increased risk. So the ethics of this really come in. So if you look at the results of this, there is 0% for increase in offshoring, but there is a fairly even split between sort of onshoring and nearshoring, and I think that's probably right. I mean, a good 50% split there, yes. Because onshoring and automating is something that many organizations are doing within their own auspices, and increasing the amount of work that they're bringing back in-house. Nearshoring is also very valuable, particularly if you can control that and you don't have the labor arbitrage issue or the reduction in labor arbitrage that we talked about before. So I think that 50%, 50-50 is probably about right. 50-50-0 is probably about right.
Sure. I think I'd also agree with the outcome of the poll. So Guy, I ask you one more question about the impact of COVID-19 on the automation? Yeah. As you know, that automation, when we started, say 6-7 years back, it was quite naive. And then the ecosystem started growing. You are launching Test Suite because the client are having a lot of issues in testing space, and you're giving them more offer. There were issues in finding the right process for automation. You have got Automation Hub for that. So what as a company, what is your strategy? Are you trying to add more and more functionality and features into your product by adding these new components going forward? As we do more work from home or work from not from the office, the security become a big concern. So,
Okay.
do you have any plan to launch some security-based products in the near future?
Okay, so let me take the first one first. The RPA vendors recognize that I use the word bog standard. Bog standard RPA, sort of the structured data, the rules-based activities, is something that is where we started. But actually, you need to be able to deal with more complex use cases, longer processes, as opposed to individual tasks. You have to automate full processes, and that's actually very difficult. And it requires artificial intelligence capabilities to be built into the platforms in order for them to handle this. So all of the vendors are starting to build those capabilities beyond the standard rules-based activities, moving information through and between systems in a structured way. UiPath is ahead of this. I'm not just saying this because I work for UiPath. It's generally considered that we're ahead on this. And it's best reflected in what Gartner have been talking about. So, bit of history. So Gartner 2 years ago thought that RPA was at best a distraction and at worst a sort of threat to their CIO and IT people. They just thought it was a nonsense. Why go through the user interface as RPA does when you can do it properly through APIs? That was 2 years ago. Right up until last year, and there was a complete volte-face where hyper-automation, as they described it, and I'll describe that in a second, became the #1 megatrend for 2020. So it went from a distraction to the #1 thing that organizations need to think about across the entire world in that very short space of time. Hyper-automation is the ability, as I mentioned, of including all of the technologies. So AI consists of a number of different technologies, so the machine learning, natural language processing, named entity recognition, ontologies for NLP, and so on and so forth, that can be brought to bear. Now, it's a very complex picture at the moment, but I'm a simple person, so I like to simplify it. So we think about it in understandings, and there are 4. So the first one is the system has to understand what it's looking at on the screen in exactly the same way that humans do. So that's visual understanding, and we've been very good at that, UiPath, mainly because that's what Daniel did when he was at Microsoft. Secondly, you've got document understanding. So organizations are still waiting around in paper. So you have to understand what that piece of paper is and what to do with it. So document understanding, intelligent OCR, and so on, named entity recognition, and so on. Then you need process understanding, which you mentioned. So process understanding is understanding which processes to automate, in what order, and which are most appropriate. So you need to understand the way that processes are built up in organizations, what actually happens as opposed to what organizations say is happening or individuals say is happening, because everyone does things in different ways. And also what to do when those processes change, because every process changes over time. So process understanding, and finally, conversational understanding, because the communication between systems and humans is changing. So at the moment we're using chatbots, but ultimately we're going to move to voice. So conversational understanding is natural language understanding, natural language processing, and so on and so forth. So those 4 understandings are the capabilities that are being built in to the RPA platform. If you do that, then that is what Gartner describes as hyper-automation. And UiPath is the organization that's leading that, because we have a full platform, a full suite of activities that enable you to identify and discover what processes to automate right the way through to the analysis and the insights that you gain from that, and it becomes a self-fulfilling loop. And that's what's driving a lot of the adoption rates, or the rapid adoption rates that we see.
So Guy, I think you're also launching an AI fabric.
Yeah.
What is all about that? So it's going to help us to go to RPA to next level. Like, for example, currently we are getting the APIs from Bluemix or AWS or Azure and to enhance our automation, or Data Robots, Snowflake. What is this AI fabric all about?
Okay, so the word fabric is the key here. So I got famous a couple of years ago for saying that AI is bollocks, because most people don't understand what AI is, and as I said, it's a collection of tools. But the fabric that goes across the entire organization, you can lay, I mean, like the screen behind me, you lay that across the entire organization, and you fit in the different bits of the AI capability in order to deal with automating more and more of your tasks. There's Automation Anywhere actually came up with a great phrase. They said that anything that can be automated will be. And so AI fabric is necessary to do the bits that RPA can't do, because it's not rules-based or structured data, to deal with the unstructured data, to deal with those edge cases that organizations have. And it's the responsibility of the Robotic Operations Center, or the COE, the Center of Excellence, to sort of put those within the organization. And you can think about AI fabric as the glue holding the bits of RPA capability and the AI capabilities together.
So, so Guy, can I also ask you, we are just across the half time of our webinar. Can you share a couple of case studies of automation which can be useful for the audience post-COVID?
Yeah, I tend to look at the market very, very high up. Most organizations start their RPA journey finance. It's the world is run on Excel. Governments run on Excel, organizations run on Excel. So most organizations start automation in finance, but then it spreads very quickly. The reason it spreads very quickly is because the value of RPA is greater than you would expect. And I'm not saying that because I work for an RPA vendor, it's just what we see in practice. So one of the great examples that I use quite frequently is an organization, an insurance business called Admiral Insurance, Admiral as in, Admiral of the Fleet. And they started with one UiPath license, but within 18 months, automation spread to every department, almost every department within that organization. And the reason it was able to do that was, one, because they had a really visionary leader who was running that, guy called Neil Davis. Secondly, he went to every department, and this is a top tip for today, went to every department, he said, you give me your smartest person, I'll give you smart robots back. And that's what the organization did. So each business unit gave their smart, one of their smart people. They then joined and created the Center of Excellence, and they developed robots for their colleagues. Afterwards, he found out that the common denominator for those people was they were all gamers. So they played computer games or board games, because they have exactly the right mentality for developing robots. They're persistent, they're problem solvers, they like pizza, all of those good things that you need to be a developer. And the way that that organization spread itself, spread automation throughout it was stunning. So Everest have done something called the playbook. So the RPA playbook. That's the step-by-step guide, and it was based on the work that Neil did, so plus others. So it's the step-by-step guide to go from pilot, because no one does PSEs anymore, proof of concept, because the technology, regardless of which technology you decide to use, works. So you go from pilot right the way through to what they call pinnacle, where automation is spread like Admiral right throughout the organization. And that's available from us and from you for free. So that step-by-step guide is really good. Actually, by the by, in the next week, we're going to be launching Playbook 2, which again was written by Everest, which is including all of the AI elements. So it's not only how do you implement RPA, but how do you implement RPA plus AI. Another good example where organizations are a bit more fragmented is an organization called Generali. Generali had grown through mergers and acquisitions. So none of the business units talk to each other, none of the people talk to each other, none of the execs talk to each other, none of the systems talk to each other. It was, by their own admission, a 70 billion euro basket case, their word, not mine. And given that, there was no way that we could actually automate because there was no control, no command and control. So what we did, we actually identified the Lean Six Sigma and process improvement people sitting within the organization and trained them up on automation. So it became a natural part of what they did. And that worked extremely well. So again, Generali then spread that throughout their entire organization. So there's two examples of how the spread can happen very fast. But we are working, if you look at our revenues, they're very evenly split. For a 4-year-old business, it's very unusual to have a revenue split that is, a third in Americas, a third in Europe, and a third in Asia. And that's we're very fortunate to have customers in all of those regions, and so we see a lot of the differences that take place between the different regions, which we can come to if you're interested.
So, Guy, I have got a couple of questions from the participants. The audience can ask those questions from you. So, one of the questions is that are BPOs who are paid by headcount still can benefit from RPA?
Yes, without doubt. In fact, if you think about it, it's the only way that BPOs are going to survive in the future. The reason for that is that you need to automate more of your internal tasks, the running of the organization, and provide those services to your customers. Because if you don't, new entrants are going to come into the market. So what we're seeing now is that those organizations that didn't do BPO, I think about the big four, by the way, the big audit-based that didn't move into BPO, are now moving into BPO because they've realized that they can automate and outsource the process, but leave the people. So you don't have the TUPE problem or the equivalent in the various countries in the Asia-Pac countries, where you're having to transfer those people to you, and then you have those on your balance sheet to then on-sell those capabilities to other customers. So what we're going to see is a radical transformation of the BPO market as a result of automation, and we're already starting to see this in India more than we have in APAC, or the more broader APAC markets. But that absolutely is going to happen. So that outsourcing will become much more efficient. It will be much more digital in nature as opposed to being fed by bodies. The commercial models are going to change so that there'll be more gain share models, more transaction pricing, rather than bums on seats, rather than that sort of per person sort of pricing models that we've is how the organizations have grown up in the intervening time. And a good example of that, funnily enough, is this the first deal that was done using UiPath technology, because that was a technology business was the customer, and it was for their offline order processing, and they had 1,000 people around the world doing that. But they'd already done the Lean Six Sigma process improvement, consolidated into a shared service operation, offshored those people. So there was really no value that the BPO provider, the company I work for, could add unless we automated. And actually the value of that was much greater than we expected, which is why I had my road to Damascus moment and realized that automation was the future.
So Guy, I have one more question from one of my close friends, and she heads the IDC in Singapore, and she covers RPA, AI, and cloud.
Yes.
Sneha Kapoor. And Sneha is asking that she has heard a lot about UiPath automating simple use cases within 48 hours as a response to COVID-19.
Yes.
Have you supported your clients to initiate and automate more complex use cases that also deal with unstructured data in record time?
Yeah, hi Sneha, glad you could join us. Yeah, the simple use cases don't take very long to implement. And when organizations and individuals are in a hurry, then they can do that. The important thing to realize, and this is something that the Blue Prism were really good at and have been since the start, is you need the governance and compliance around that. So where there's emergency, like there is with COVID-19, you can put things in very fast. However, that governance and compliance still needs to be retrogradely fitted basically to those processes if they continue over time. What RPA is really good at in terms of the current emergency is that it's really good at dealing with backlogs. But that's fairly simple, as Snehal says, fairly simple business cases. Where you've got more complex ones, that's where you need the support and control of IT plus the COE, or the Robotics Operations Center, to actually build and maintain that. Because if you remember back to what I was saying about processes, every process changes over time, and the key indicator of that is the exception levels go up. So the reason that we acquired Process Gold and Stepshot at the back end of last year, and is now our process understanding, if you think about that, our process task mining and process mining, is that you identify not only those tasks that are able to be automated very quickly, which is what we're seeing with COVID-19, but also how those processes change over time and fix the robots in a much more effective way, and ultimately self-healing. We're not there yet, but that's the direction of travel for those more complex use cases. So I think the governance control is really important when it comes to those longer use cases, those more complex use cases, and that's why the creation of the COE and the support of the CIO is so critical. But we can talk about that, Snehal, if we set up a separate call.
Sure. I have one question regarding change management. Like in the COVID-19 world, the changes are happening very fast and very frequent. So how automation will be implemented and the change management will be controlled in the post-COVID era?
I don't think we'll change that much as a result of COVID. That automation is being accelerated, or digital transformation is being accelerated by COVID. That's absolutely true. But in terms of what we have learned over the last 30 years of doing any transformation, regardless of whether that's digital transformation or otherwise, is that the technology, frankly, is not important. That's not where the bulk of the transformation needs to take place. Transformation, in fact, Gartner was talking about this the other day. If you think about an iceberg, with 90% of the ice below the surface, the top bit, the bit you can see, is the tech. So that's any new technology that you care to imagine. So RPA, the AI tools, your BPM tools, and so on and so forth. The whole alphabet soup of technology. Below the surface is where the transformation really takes place, and those are the soft issues. Those are the cultural issues that organizations need to get sorted out. The transformation. So when about 2.5 years ago, we did a full transformation, a full implementation of RPA to one of our big customers, because we were setting up a professional services, a customer success team, and we wanted them to understand every step in the process. So they came to us afterwards to do a presentation on what they'd learned, and I ended up laughing because the things that they found that were difficult were exactly the same things that every transformation and change program has come across in the last 30 years. So it's all about communication. It's all about executive sponsorship. It's all about transformational teams being in place at the right time or the right place, and so on and so forth. Nothing to do with the technology. So I think that there won't be a huge amount of change, but the tools that you've got that enable that are just becoming more efficient.
So Guy, I have one of my close friends, Nick. He's with one of the topmost Indian IT company or a BPO company. And he is asking me a question for you. A lot of BPS tenders currently have been halted, postponed, and few of the companies have halted their discretionary spend owing to business struggling. Yeah. Given the uncertainty in economies and business, what forecast or guidance is coming from UiPath and RPA vendors given this space in the last 5 years has been the fastest growing in tech sector?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. Thanks, Nick. So I think if you look at the broader market, I think that what's happening, what we're seeing, is that the result of COVID is that those organizations that already had RPA, and to a lesser extent AI, and were scaling it out, are doubling down. So they are buying more quickly because they see the value, and they've recognized that the return on investment of those type of technologies is A, fast, as we've already discovered, and B, quite material, and provides the organization an agility that they didn't have before. So the currency, if you like, we talked a bit about the previous use cases being all based on headcount reduction. Now it's time back to the business. That's really the currency. So time allows you to be agile, allows you to change, allows you to adapt, which is critically important for the response to COVID. So if those organizations, and IDC is actually doing a really interesting longitudinal study on this, with the same organizations every 2 weeks. So we'll be very interested in seeing the results of that. I think they're 6 weeks into it, so we've got three that we can look at the moment. So they're accelerating their use of RPA and other technologies. Those organizations that were just starting or hadn't started at all, I've put it, as Nick says, put everything on hold. So because they've got other things to worry about, about their people and health and all the rest of it. So they haven't seen the value of automation, broad automation, hyper automation. So they put everything on hold. That doesn't mean they're going to bin it completely. It just means for the next few months nothing will happen. I had a conversation with a very large customer, again another not customer, funnily enough, who were thinking about doing automation. Put everything on hold. What we're expecting to see towards the end of this year, as the market starts to pick up again, is that the delta between success and failure will get wider and wider and wider, because those organizations that are using automation now and are continuing to scale it will continue to improve, whereas those that have put it on hold will actually diminish over time, and they will lose competitive advantage. So it might be a little bit self-serving, but looking at the broader market, I think those organizations that can automate now, even during the crisis, should do. And again, I hasten to add, it doesn't matter which technology you decide to use in terms of pure RPA, because they all do what they say on the tin. So in terms of the entire market, I think that that will continue to grow, and that's what we've seen in Q1, which we closed a couple of days ago, last week. But actually, those organizations that don't will reduce their effectiveness by the end of next year. Then it will be more difficult to catch up. So I think there's a competitive advantage in deciding to do these things today, now, even in a small part, to try and inculcate that throughout the organization. So, use this example. Sorry, Matt, go.
Sorry, I totally agree with you, Guy. I think there's a voice gap. So accordingly, I want to do a poll also here on this particular topic.
Yeah.
Given the COVID-19, will your organization pivot to more innovative ideas or stick to traditional keep the lights on strategy? So Guy, as a UiPath, what is your strategy? Like, again, if you can share with no confidentiality issues.
Yeah, so our strategy, our roadmap, our vision, if you like, is one where we are facilitating everyone to be as efficient as possible. And what that translates as is a robot for every person. If you think back to the late 70s, when Bill Gates stood up and said that he envisions a time when every household and every desk would have a computer, and by the way, he got laughed at, we now believe that the total addressable market for automation is a robot for every person. And there are some organizations that have already started down that route. So PwC, for instance, PricewaterhouseCoopers, started with a program last year where they gave all of their US employees a UiPath robot to automate the bits of their job that they hated, basically. And that was so successful that that PwC is now rolling that out throughout their entire global population. Every employee will have a UiPath robot, and that's just one example. What we're seeing now is that more and more organizations are going down that route. So with and I hasten to add that the robot for every person has a mixture of unattended activities, so the stuff that you really don't want to see again, so the stuff that's boring, mundane, repetitive, stuff that RPA is really good at. Plus, with the AI tools, with AI Fabric and with our hyper automation platform, you've got it will help you to do the stuff that you do want to do. So assist and enhance your capabilities. So a combination of both of those is why we see a robot for every person as being the future. And of course that's what's driving the valuations of RPA. So the market is still nascent. It's still right at the start. And right at the start of this conversation, I said that there are big three organizations, the BAUs, but we're still relatively small. But I think it's given the growth rates that we've seen and expecting, even with COVID-19 and post-COVID, then actually there will all be big organizations. So let's look at the results.
I think
again, that's a very sensible way of looking at it. Only doing traditional methods is going to be more difficult. Only using innovative operations is risky. So I think the combination of both is absolutely the right answer. Mohit, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm very proud of the participants. They're giving a very, very right, views and the right polls, the voting. I personally believe that we need to have a mixture of traditional and innovative. Too much aggressive is also dangerous. You can't hit all the balls. So, Guy, there's a question from Manish Bhatia, and he's asking that. Given the visual understanding and document understanding becoming common at entry level, would the strength be more on process understanding?
No, I think it has to be equal, Manish. I think that if you look at those four understandings, they all have to equally be implemented. So we've got four development teams in places all beginning with B, oddly enough. So Bengaluru in India, Bucharest in Romania, where we were born, as an organization, Brooklyn in New York State, and Bellevue in Washington State. And they're all working on those four understandings. Actually, what I think is going to happen is that computer vision, UiPath has always been really good at. So particularly for BPO organizations, shared service operations, where they're operating over Citrix, UiPath has always been generally considered to be the best at dealing with that, because BPOs don't have access to the underlying application of their customers. They tend to operate over Citrix. So you're looking at a bitmap, you're looking at a picture. So as the underlying application changes, then that used to break automations, used to break RPA, or the precursor to RPA, screen scraping and so on. So UiPath's always been ahead of that. The reason that we acquire Process Gold and Stepshot is because it accelerates the adoption of automation, because you can understand what each individual process is, and how to automate it, and when you should automate and when you shouldn't automate, depending on the circumstances. And then and then what happens when the changes. Document understanding is really important, and we've actually set up a relationship with Deloitte on this, providing what they're calling the IDP. So it's intelligent document processing. But we have to build those capabilities ourselves as well. And then we have conversational understanding. So I think you need all four in order to be able to provide the broadest number of use cases across all industries and all geographies. So I don't think there's any particular order of that, but I suspect that we're going to make acquisitions in the conversational understanding space and in the document understanding space to support the sort of leader position that we have on the other two.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the process mining steps. I think all those will add to the whole ecosystem. So guys, we have less than 4 minutes left. So I will just launch one poll, but I just want you to keep on sharing your takeaways or the advice going forward for the participant in the post-COVID era and how to use automation for that.
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed, I think automation will become, well, I said before that the RPA and AI is going to disappear. And I think that's true. And I don't think it's going to disappear because it's not going to get used. It's going to disappear because it's going to get used everywhere. It will just be the standard way that individuals within organizations and even at home will automate more and more of their tasks. If you think back, I mean, you know, I'm 53, I'm an old person. If you think back to the sort of late 70s, early 80s, there was something that organizations had called a secretary. And the secretary did all of the tasks that you didn't want to do, so you could focus on the things that you wanted to. And those secretaries are now morphed into what is essentially a digital assistant. And that digital assistant will be the robot, partly unattended and partly attended, as we discussed. I think that time will come faster as a result of COVID-19. As we said, it's an accelerant. But also, I think that the way that people interact with the technology is also going to change. Well, you know, the answer of the box, you know, there are so many factors to consider about the future of a business, not the future of work. You know, a lot of the reports and a lot of the plans that organizations had to look at their, you know, the future of work have been ripped up and thrown in the bin as a result of COVID-19. So what we're doing now, particularly with the analysts, is looking at the new future of work. So, and that extends much more broadly than just automation, much more broadly than just AI. So there are things like ethical issues, as I mentioned briefly about the Indian outsourcing organizations. It's also about the way that robots are going to be part of our lives, both at work and at home. So that raises interesting questions. So that if you own the robot and it automates your home activities as much as it does your work activities, when you join a new company, does that mean that the robot will learn your job at the same time as you do? And in which case, do you own the robot or does the company own the robot? These are all questions that we're looking at right now. And then there's the whole area around that future of work ethic and how there's going to be a move from full-time employment to gig economy. And we don't really have time to discuss that now, but we can do that on another day. So I think the 70-30 split between full-time employment and gig economy is going to reverse over the next 10 to 20 years. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we look after people and create their careers for them rather than them having to do it. But that's a topic for another day.
Sure. Guy, I think we can keep on talking for long hours and hours, but unfortunately the time has finished now.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
I really appreciate sharing your insights and views for the audience. And this will be shared with it's recorded now. And we shared with all the participants if they want to go again through your comments and your views and insights. I think it's our pleasure that you have been here and to share your views with us. We really appreciate and we are honored that you are here with us and you have shared your views with us. We wish you all the best. We wish UiPath all the best going forward. And we're looking forward to your UiPath live event on 12th.
Yeah, so that's UiPath Live. Anyone that wants to join, look up UiPath Live. That's where we're launching 20.4, which is our new platform. And that will be on the 13th of May. And there are two shows, one for US and Europe and another one for APAC. So unlike me, you don't have to get up at dark o'clock to do this, as you normally do. So anyone working for an American organization, they have to get up very early if they're Pacific Coast. And so we spread it out. But please join us if you can and look that up. And final thing, if anyone has any questions, I'm on LinkedIn. but also email me. So my email address is guy@uipath.com. So any questions at all, anything you want to know, please do drop me a line. And of course, fantastic work by Mohit and his team at Minefields. Any questions, please go to Mohit as well. Thank you all very much indeed.
No, thanks, Guy, and thanks for getting up so early in the morning for this webinar.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I can get another cup of tea now.
Good. Thank you very much, Guy. Thank you all for your participants today.
Okay. Thanks. Bye all.
Bye.